we have been talking about proof of stake and sharding as being part of the roadmap since almost the very beginning of the project, right?
Yes.
Like the very first proof of stake blog post is from January 2014, which was 2 months after the project started, and like maybe even a day after the announcement. So it was proof of stake was not something that we kind of put on anybody by surprise. I like proof of stake, and I've liked proof of stake for many years, basically because like it just requires much less ongoing resource consumption. So proof of stake, you don't really need that much electricity. You just need just a little bit to run a regular computer. You can run proof of stake validators on computers that you already have. So it's just much less resource intensive. And like this is good for a few reasons, right? Like one is the kind of environmental rationale that you're not breaking the environment. The second is that you're not taking away electricity and like other resources from other people, because participating in consensus does not require so much energy expenditure. You don't need to pay people as much to participate, right? So like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they both issue somewhere around 4% of the total supply every year right now to miners. So Ethereum is about 4.7 million Ether, and the current supply is about 115 million. But with proof of stake, like we expect it'll be somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million per year. So that means the supply doesn't have to increase so quickly.
You can, other things being equal, you can reduce issuance and maintain the same level of security or have a higher level of security in theory. Those are the biggest benefits to proof of stake.
Transitioning to proof of stake will reduce the issuance of Ethereum due to the reduced cost it takes to secure the network. Instead of paying gas fees to miners, you now pay validators to confirm your transactions.
All the validators are precisely the same size. They all have the same stake, right? So what this means is if there's 1,000 validators and I'm running one, then every 1,000 blocks, I'm going to get what's called a slot, where I get to be the block proposer. I get to be the one who creates the block. On all the other blocks, I still get paid rewards, but I get paid a very small sliver of rewards. And that's for doing what's called attesting, right? So I see the block, the last block that was produced. I just like in Bitcoin, just like we talked about, I check that it's valid, et cetera, and then I notarize it. I sign it and I say this block is valid. Okay, this is the process of validating. So if you actually look at the rewards function over time, you have like little, you get 0.001 ETH, 0.001 ETH, 0.001 ETH, and then once every few days, you get a big jump. Oh, I got 0.1 ETH or something.
Okay.
And that's because I produced the block there. If you want to stake, someone needs to sell you the coins to stake in the first place, right? And this is closely tied to another issue with proof of stake, which is that proof of work is great for getting the initial distribution in place, right? So when Bitcoin started, there were no Bitcoin in existence, and every block that was mined, obviously Satoshi mined the first few blocks and some of the other early folks, that had the effect over many years of getting lots of Bitcoin in the hands of lots of parties around the world, just casual hobbyists in the beginning, and then later on more professionals. It's also been the case in Ethereum proof of work mining. Proof of stake doesn't work that way, right? It doesn't solve the distribution problem. So in practice, what most of these projects and protocols do is they have a set of investors early on, and they just hand a bunch of coins to those investors. And those investors have the coins and stake them and continue to earn more coins against them. So as I said, it's not permissionless, and it doesn't solve the distribution problem. So those are two pretty straightforward but big flaws, I think, with proof of stake.
Proof of stake has its own flaws and trade-offs compared to proof of work. If Ethereum is thought of as ultrasound money, it is important to understand how the merge to proof of stake will impact its monetary policy.
Because Ethereum's monetary policy is loose and has changed many times, and we should talk about that as well, because I was part of those decisions. And how can money be sound if the small number, if a cabal, so to speak, kind of like can change it at will? I don't think it's exactly that simple, but right on the one hand. On the other hand, Ethereum has begun to reduce its issuance, and issuance will continue to reduce and in fact reach a point where it's net deflationary, right? So more coins are being burnt than are being created. So if your definition of sound money is that it's is that the issuance is predictable and well known, like in the case of Bitcoin, that it's sort of Bitcoin is like slowly approaching deflationary, or that it's basically that issuance is deflationary, then Ethereum kind of is sound money, right? If you believe that. But the thing is, the transition to proof of stake and ETH2 has taken so much longer than expected that the difficulty bomb has been pushed back at least 3 times. I think maybe 4 times by now. Now, here's the thing. This is where things begin to get very interesting and also very complicated. If you look at Ethereum monetary policy as of inception, as of the Genesis block, right? you have to factor in the difficulty bomb, right? Which is to say that the first time it kicked in, which would have been, I don't know, 2017, something like that, right? Issuance kind of would have halted at that point in time. And the idea was that there should have been a proof of stake chain running by then, but there wasn't. And so every time we push back the difficulty bomb, we increase the issuance. Increase, not decrease, okay? Which means diluting everyone's holdings significantly.
While proof of stake will eventually reduce the issuance of ETH, since the merge has been delayed so many times, it has impacted the monetary policy of Ethereum. This gives rise to problems like the cantillon effect.
So the cantillon effect, it sort of states that money is not neutral. Money is political, okay? And inflation does not impact everyone or every sector of the economy equally. And the way it's usually characterized is to say that the actors who are closest to the like organs of power in the state are the ones who benefit the most from inflation issuance, things like that. They're close to the money spigot, so to speak, right? So this is, I think, proof of stake is a perfect example of this, right? And so I think those powerful, wealthy actors are highly incentivized to evolve the protocol in such a way that, like, whether they intentionally do this or unintentionally, subconsciously, sometimes we do things out of our own self-interest, right? In a way that's not necessarily good for like the overall health of the network or the minnows as opposed to the whales. I certainly don't think it's the case that like some whale is necessarily like
influencing the decision.
No, influencing they are for sure.
Oh, they are.
And I've also had like pseudonymous whales reach out to me both in person and online and kind of nudge me one way or the other. So like there's people talk about like
what's a nudge? Hey, I think you should make this decision, or hey, I'll give you this if you make this decision.
Both.
Oh, okay. So there are
Both.
People offering incentives.
Yeah, I've never been like threatened or anything like that, but I did have kind of like shady figures approach me at parties and dark rooms and say, "Hey, you don't know me, but I'm this person. I was, influential in the network previously. I'm a big Ethereum bag holder."
So there are people out there offering bribes.
I don't think I was ever actually offered an explicit bribe.
Well,
I was sort of like sent funds to do things. Like, here's, like, I want you to spin up a voting website to vote for ProgPow, which was this possible change in the mining algorithm. Like I said before, here's, $1,000 to do it, something like that, right? We're not talking about huge sums of money.
Yeah.
I never was given explicit bribes, but what I was, it's kind of like influence peddling. I don't know the exact word for this. Maybe that's not the right word for it, because that would be me selling influence. It was people cozying up to me. And actually, this was one of my issues in Ethereum, was that there was no disclosure of conflicts of interest, and they're rife. I mean, they're everywhere in the space in the Ethereum Foundation, among the core developers, et cetera. A couple people did. I think actually Vitalik was one of them. He kind of went out and said, "Look, this is my public Ethereum wallet address. These are the other. I'm an advisor for these projects. I hold these coins, these tokens, et cetera." Like, I think that, again, this is a thing. This is a normal thing in real world governance, right? After a year, 18 months, I was like, holy shit, like, what am I really doing here? I'm really pumping Joe Lubin's bags. All due respect to Joe Lubin and all the other, Ethereum whales. It's just not what I want to do. And the reason for that was largely the pre-mine, right? Because at that moment, 70%, 70% of all the Ether in existence as of a couple years ago had been distributed in the pre-mine. Today, it's about 60%. It's been diluted a little bit, right? So I don't know where you draw. I don't know what the right number is. I mean, we will never have another Bitcoin. We'll never have another immaculate conception. Again, I don't know if the right number is 10%, 15%, 20%. You could draw the line wherever you want. 70, 80, 70, 60 it's too much. It's just too much. There was a very clear class difference 2017, 2018, when I was in the project, between pre-sale people, pre-sale people, and post-pre-sale people, because Ethereum had 100x, 1000x, whatever by then, right? So like there was this very small group of people who all knew each other, all trusted each other, had these working relationships, were making the decisions, and on top of that, they were post-economic, right? They kind of had this like economic security, so they don't like care if they're getting paid. And then there was kind of the rest of us who have like bills to pay and like realities and have to keep our feet on the ground. And so this is like the kind of issues I think that are not well addressed by tyranny of structurelessness. Human society, human institutions and organizations always have hierarchy. Always. It cannot be avoided, right? Anytime you have more than kind of 2 or 3 people sitting in a room together, fighting over scarce resources, figuring out how to allocate time, making some decision, some hierarchy just emerges, right? And so you can kind of either choose to formalize that hierarchy into institutions and roles and democracy and things like that, or you can just let this structureless kind of tyranny emerge, right? And so this is kind of like what's happened in Ethereum. It's what happens in a lot of these institutions and organizations that kind of sweep governance under the rug and, kind of like stick their fingers in their ears and say like, we don't need governance. We don't need governance. We're, better than that. We're smarter than that. I think the Ethereum Foundation is run at the whim of Vitalik Buterin.
Okay. Still.
Yeah. I mean, again, as of 2 years ago, I have no idea what's happened since then. I think the governance of the foundation itself is structured in such a way. There's a certain number of like board seats. I think Vitalik has multiple votes. There's little to no transparency, little to no accountability. Thank goodness Vitalik is not a bad actor, right? I think he's a decent human being and has the best interests of the network at heart. However, it's hypocrisy. And this is, I said that sort of pre-mine was the biggest reason I left Ethereum. I think the second biggest reason is hypocrisy. This is an important point to make. Ethereum, to the extent that there is like a sort of publicly stated mission, it's, as I was alluding to before, it's about like building better human institutions that are more participatory, fair, more transparent, et cetera. And yet, Ethereum governance itself, and specifically the Ethereum Foundation, is none of those things, right? There's no transparency, there's no accountability whatsoever, period. Ethereum is kind of a technocracy, right? In the sense that there's a relatively small group of technical core contributors, core developers, who get on this call. I described the fortnightly call. It's called the All Core Devs call, and sort of make these decisions in a fashion called rough consensus. So this is another topic which is very interesting. But long story short, there's two issues with this. The first is that technical contributors, first of all, don't have the expertise to weigh in on these things. We don't have training in economics, and we're making monetary policy decisions. We don't have training in conflict resolution and ethics and philosophy in sort of these questions, right? That's the first issue. And the second issue is that a lot of the technical core contributors are very sort of reluctant to weigh in on these things, maybe because they don't feel they have the expertise, but also because it opens them up to potential liability. Yeah, so there's like, 10, 12 people who made these decisions. I was running Python scripts. I was one of these people. I think Vitalik probably chimed in, a couple of other folks did, but none of us are trained economists, none of us. And at least in the decisions that I was a part of, like, not only did we not get input from economists, like it was, I should dig up some of these like Twitter threads or Medium articles. It was kind of like, put your finger in the air, like judge which way the wind is going and say, okay, we're going to reduce it from 5 to 3. Like, why not? That sounds like a reasonable number. We don't know what the right amount to pay for issuance is. We don't, genuinely. The best thing we can do is like, look at what Bitcoin's doing, look at what other networks are doing. Okay, Ethereum Classic was attacked. It's not paying enough. We need to pay more.
Ethereum is a half-finished product, and the Ethereum Foundation, led by Vitalik Buterin, is responsible for overseeing Ethereum's completion. Since the Ethereum Foundation is a relatively small group of core developers, this gives rise to issues such as tyranny of structurelessness. And when Ethereum transitions to proof of stake, it will impact the network's monetary policy, which gives rise to such issues like the cantillon effect. That needs to be taken into account if you subscribe to the narrative that Ethereum is ultrasound money. The attack on Ethereum Classic that Wayne Reddick was referring to is crucial to understand, since it gives insight into the measures that the Ethereum Foundation will take if their network is attacked. Not only that, understanding the consequences of a hard fork is important, since the merge to proof of stake will open the door for a variety of different forking attacks.